What's going on, everyone? Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are, wherever you're watching from, to this very last minute podcast on Fantasy Formula One for 2023. Joining me, as always, is Andrey, all the way over in Australia. How are you doing, Andrey?
Good. It's good to be back. How are you doing?
Doing pretty good, man. I'm, glad we got this going again. For everyone watching, we used to do these on demand based on, folks requesting it. I know that this is a little last minute because we basically put this together in the last 12 hours or so.
Well, it seems
But
like Formula One put their game together in the
pretty
last
much,
second
right?
as
They
well.
kept us
So
waiting. Yeah, they kept us waiting until the very end. And a lot's changed. We're going to go through some of the big changes, some of the big strategies. So, for those of you that are not aware, my name's Eric. We put together this Motorsport AI channel off a project that I've used using Salesforce Einstein Analytics to help make some predictions. And Andrey, big statistician fan, puts amazing models. If you've ever been on f1fantasytools.com, you get to see some of his amazing models. We'll go over some of them today. And our game plan here is just to have a conversation as you're getting a chance to watch this. I know that it's right now 6 a.m. in US Eastern. It's 3 a.m. if you're Pacific. Folks may be working. So the audience might not be all there. So you may be watching this after the fact, but we're going to try to cover as much as we can so that way you can take a chance to watch this at your own pace, see some of the strategies, some of the things that we're seeing, some of the things that we're predicting, and then later on bookmark this so that way you can come back at the end of the season and tell us how badly this video aged. But kicking it off, I mean, if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them down as we're going through. But let's kick off with a big one. Let's talk about what's missing, right? What's missing this year that we all got used to, Andrey, with regards to Fantasy Formula One?
yeah, so I guess for a little bit of context, the developer for Formula One Fantasy before has been PlayOn, and for one reason or the other, that is no longer the case, and a new set of developers has taken on Fantasy, and I'm not sure if there's any sort of copyrightable things or what might have gone behind closed doors. Like, that's for somebody else to speculate, but some of the things are taken away. So one of the first things is dynamic pricing. That was one of the key things that PlayOn has introduced into the game, and in a way it had its fans, it had its it's like whatever kind of people, and I was probably one of the latter ones. Was trying to deal with it as best as I could, but at the same time, it's one of those things where you just have to keep paying attention to whatever. And like me being in Australia, and most of the world being in, like, let's say Europe, that cares about Formula One, it produced this an unfortunate set of circumstances where I had to just kind of like keep being awake at odd hours to pay attention to those things. So in a way, one change that is predictable, some irrelevant time, is going to be probably a good thing. Other things that were missing are some of the points that were being made up. So beat teammate is gone, and then qualification status and race status points. Like, so if you finish the race, it's 1 point. If you came Q1, that's 1 point. 2 points for Q2, 3 points for Q3. And it might not sound like a big deal, but if you're in Haas and Williams, and those are your only points that you might reliably get, then you kind of go from a few points to 0. And I think that's a massive change, because now going from one of those back markers to somebody reasonable who has a chance at points, like finishing in the points, I mean, that could be significant.
It's a massive difference. And we're going to talk about some of that stuff that you're touching on, because back marker traffic used to play a massive role in fantasy points, and now we're kind of looking at the numbers. We're looking at some predictions, and we're trying to find strategy elsewhere, right, to make up for our points. So we'll definitely be talking a little bit about that. But you're telling me that being 12 hours in the future is not helpful to your cause?
Not yet.
All right. So let's talk about the big one, because you did kind of talk about pricing, right? And we had dynamic pricing. I, for one, am actually very happy. Um, I ran some private leagues throughout the past couple of years, and and the dynamic pricing really kind of made it a second game within a game, right? And
Yeah.
that was one of the biggest challenges that I saw a lot of colleagues of mine. I'm fortunate that I work in the time zone that a lot of these changes used to occur. And I also work remotely. So I have three computer screens at my work desk, and I have all of the, so as I'm doing my work and everything on the day to day, it only takes about, a minute or two to just kind of, open a tab on fantasy and be able to go, all right, make the switch, and capitalize. But at the same time, I realized that, for most folks, it's an extra burden. It's an extra game. So like by the later half of the season, you start getting these lopsided teams, right? Where it's like some teams have this massive budget, right? That whereas before, if you had to settle with three back marker traffics to make some high level picks, right? Now you could, like, instead of having to select between a Joe and an Albon, now you can be picking some, like, an extra Alonso, so to say, right? Like a top midfield contender or something like that, which adds up to, like, 10, 15 points per race sometimes, between what an Albon can score and what an Alonso could score.
Yeah, that's huge. I think there's a good difference between like making good choices and being rewarded for having made those choices as a result of being committed to that asset within the game. But if
Mhm.
you divorce those two considerations and you can make whatever substitutions and you score with whatever drivers that you pick for the next race, just kind of defeats the purpose. And uh, it was probably the only fantasy game that I've played so far where it was that blatant, where the budget was something that you just keep increasing within whatever limitations of your attention span, and that's just it's not a good game decision, a game design decision, and I hope we don't know the details of what the new pricing model is going to be like, but I hope that it's going to be better. Um,
So one of the big things for everyone that's just jumping in or starting to learn about this, so far as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong here, the promise this time around is that we're going to once a week, or like one time in between races, there's going to be a price change. Is that correct?
yes,
Is that your
I'm a little bit
understanding?
unclear. Like they say once a week, that's written, but it doesn't say once per race week. So
Right.
does that mean if you have 3 weeks in between that you might have like two increases, or I don't know. I hope it's just one per race week.
Yeah.
It's something that they could clarify a little bit.
Yeah. Well, yeah. We'll be curious to see what they have to say about that. So ultimately, this is going to play a big role, and there are a lot of things that we still don't know, right? You were mentioning some of the things that, not only in the frequency of week versus race week, but equally how big of a swing this is going to be, and equally, they're kind of guessing numbers, and we're going to talk about that, because one of the big things that we look at is that I still think it's the one of the most valid numbers, if not the most valid number, which is the points per million, right? And understanding how many points can someone bring in for the price.
Yeah.
So that'll be one of the big things. So there's a lot of things that we still need to figure out with regards to pricing to see. Hopefully, it becomes better, right? Hopefully, it's not too exorbitant of a price change. And the biggest piece, at least for me, from last year's, and I've said this several times in kind of like an open letter statement, and in hoping that this gets changed, is that if pricing can come around and be based on points per million, kind of balancing folks out on price per million, my bet is that that would make the fantasy game a lot more exciting, because ultimately it gives players more options. And I didn't even bring the screen up, but I can probably bring it up so we can discuss it. But one of the biggest things that I'm seeing early on, and it's not going to be a surprise on the biggest teams we're recommending, but like the difference in the picked percentage is massive. Like, you can almost tell that everyone's going to run almost the same exact teams
Yeah.
at least in this first round, based on the pricing. Some teams and some drivers, some constructors and some drivers are too appealing to pass up based on what everyone's looking at from preseason testing. So, those are some of the big things. Anything else that you have there with regards to pricing, Andre?
Yeah, so I guess with all of the shenanigans that are going on with PlayOn's dynamic pricing that got manipulated into oblivion, they ended up fixing it to a certain target for ppm, and in the code you could even see that it was like 1.2 points per million for drivers and 1.55 points per million for constructors, and it was slowly but surely converging, and they set the the decay factor to be like quite slow. So like it took them the full 7 or 8 remaining races after the change to actually get pretty close to what the intended targets were. There is no sign of that kind of calibration being done right now, right? So some of the simulations that I've done so far have like drastically different ppm values. Like Red Bull is at 2.5, Aston Martin is close to 4. A bunch of back market drivers are hovering about between 0 and 0.5. It's not a calibrated game, and I'm not sure how they're going to bring it back, right? Like, did they decide that ppm is the end all be all, or is it something that is a bit more extravagant, where like they just say, oh, you had a good race, you finished above where you started, you had some overtakes, here you go, if you point ones or something like that. I have no idea. Like, when it comes to other fantasy games like Grid Rival, and if you don't want to put up with official F1 fantasy, Grid Rival is probably one of the better alternatives out there. It's just one of the features that I can't get behind there is that you have to like sign drivers for a contract, and then if you have a casual friend that might not be checking their team every week, all of a sudden they have an empty team, and that's just it's a bit of a game breaker for me. But yeah, too much is unknown, and I can't even begin to guess how, let's say, Red Bull's price will react when they come 1-2, because their price should probably go up at that stage, but by how much? And like, will somebody else like Aston Martin, who might be severely underpriced, will they go up by more?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sharing, some of the numbers that you've put together, Andre. And for everyone watching, there's a lot of extrapolation here, just to get started with regards to how we're predicting points. There's some factor now with regards to the pit stop points. There's the driver of the day points. But even still, this is what we're talking about here. You can see here for all of these different constructors and different drivers, right? If you're looking at Red Bull, for example, here's a 2.5 points per million, right? Meaning they're bringing, you're dividing the total points that were expected them to bring. Here, 69 points divided by their current price as a constructor. But we were talking about having these, prices based on points per million, and bringing prices up and prices down to kind of balance it out. Because if different drivers and different constructors are bringing around the same points per million, then it kind of becomes a more exciting game in terms of giving you more options. And if you don't have a lot of options, then we start getting lopsided. So you can see here the clear cases. In this particular case, and I'll switch this around here just a little bit, you can see Aston Martin has 3.9 points per million. Like, it's unheard of, I would say, right, Andre, to be able to have this high of a points per million in terms of what's
Yeah,
offered and what their potential is.
yeah, we haven't seen that many points per million, except for maybe Haas at the beginning of last year, but they were improving from that last to, like, I don't know, construction number 6. So it was like multiplying their really small price, like 5, to like a good number of points. But here it feels like it's taking like a midfielder and puts it right at the top of the midfield, and that's just maybe the artifact of the expectations. So these numbers, just again context, are based on some of the Formula One like model AI stuff that they put up in articles showing what the qualification pace and race pace are after you control for things like tires, and they're trying to infer things from telemetry. I guess I have to rely on that a little bit because, there's a shortage of information still. And as, free practice 1, 2, 3 come in, like we can definitely improve upon the models.
So a question for you there. Sorry, the question for you there, especially because this is the first race. I know the timing is really odd for you, but for the folks going to Formula1FantasyTools.com and joining the Discord server there, are you going to show some updated numbers as soon as we have some free practice data? Are you going to rerun the simulations?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like between FP3 and Q1, somewhere in the middle of those 2 hours, I'll post something, so you'll have an hour to react based on what I put up.
So for those listening in, if you haven't, check out Formula1FantasyTools.com. They have the Discord server there. All of the information's there for you guys to take a look at, play around with your teams, get a chance to understand. They even have a really awesome team calculator function. So everything that Andrey's Andrey's putting together, you can actually use his simulations, and usually there are a couple other folks that contribute with simulations as well, so you can basically kind of put in your budget if you want to use any tools, whatever you'd like. Usually there's a few notes, and you can even put some override predictions here if you'd like, so that way you can say, hey, the prediction is that they're going to bring in this many points. You can put in whatever points you want, so that way you can really take a look and see what are the top recommended teams. If you're looking for alternatives, and especially later down in the future when we're talking about only having 2, possibly 3 free transfers, if you haven't used all of them on the previous race, then you can put in your team and the number of free transfers that you have, and you can even see what the recommendations are then. So this is a fantastic tool. Highly recommended for anyone that's curious about learning a little bit more. So, and we'll probably be using this along our conversation this evening, to help make some of our points in some of our cases. So just something for everyone here.
Yeah, and I guess you put this up, and last year this calculator was also available, but the format was a little bit different. Instead of having 2 constructors that we see up there now, it was just the 1 constructor. So let me ask you the question: like, how do you see that changing the game?
So that's a massive one, right? Because the double constructor here was like last year, the constructors played such an important role, right? We ran the simulations. We've told everyone. Some people still try to prove us wrong. Very rarely did going all out on great drivers and picking a terrible constructor or a constructor that wouldn't yield too many points. Very rarely did that pan out. There have been some cases. I remember the folks that picked McLaren on Monza in 2021 that struck gold, but it's very tough to be able to consistently strike gold like that. And time and time again, it showed that picking the right constructors was the better move. And if you look at it from a perspective of rules alone, the changes that we have, yes, there are some changes that could affect the constructors in terms of points, but I think like back marker traffic, the drivers, right, themselves were more severely affected because the beat teammate points are gone. So that's crucial points per million. And again, at least in my mind, everything goes back to points per million. Those are crucial points per million opportunities that is just going to bring down the slower drivers. Whereas for constructors, I don't see that that's being affected as much. And the simulations even show, right? And I think you even have a great simulation here that we'll go at it in a second, but right now it's very clear, right? It's like everything's pointing to either Red Bull or Ferrari and Red Bull or Aston. And whether everyone's looking at your simulations or not. So if we look, right, and this is probably going to be ridiculously small for folks that are watching, but at the time of this recording, 54% of you, so we have out of every watcher here, every other watcher here, one of you has Aston Martin on their team. Almost everyone here has Red Bull on their team. And then 1 in 3 have Ferrari on their team, and then it just drops dramatically to 16-15%, much lower. So everyone's almost on that. The constructors play a big role, and everyone's betting on these particular constructors. And you can see, right, even if you look at the drivers, again, Fernando Alonso, Aston Martin driver, 68%. That's 2 out of every 3 of you. It has Fernando Alonso. Max Verstappen is there as well. Charles Leclerc is there. So, and then you can see that the numbers start dropping dramatically. Because everyone is looking at these constructors this way. And I think it's going to continue to be as important as before. And most importantly, though, I want to highlight something that you brought up, Andrey, that if you're looking at your simulations, all of what I'm bringing up is available on the the Formula One Fantasy Tools Discord. So for those that are not aware, these look kind of wild to look at first if you don't know what you're looking at. This center lane here is Andrey's top predictions based on a $100 million budget, which is what we all start with. And you can see in terms of the teams that are being proposed, it's Red Bull, Ferrari, Red Bull, Aston, Red Bull, Ferrari, Red Bull, Aston. However, as soon as the budgets start increasing a little bit, which now we're looking, I think this is 103, Andrey?
104.
104. So if we're at 104, right, and just extrapolating, nobody has 104 right now, but assuming we get there, suddenly you do not see greens anymore. You see Red Bull and Ferrari. So you asked me the question. I think I laid the groundwork there for you.
There's one.
Yeah, there's one. Finally, one. 2. But as we start getting towards the lower points, right, lower scoring points, it gives you some options. But you asked me if double constructors are still going to play a big role, if that's going to play a massive role. I think it is. It seems like your numbers tend to indicate that it will be too, especially as the budgets start going up. Can you elaborate a little bit on that one?
Yeah, so I guess there's a number of ways of optimizing things, right? So the way that I do simulations here is I just brute force every combination and calculate all the points because I want to look at the distributions, and at that point it doesn't really matter what you do. It's quick enough anyway. Like if you got a Threadripper, it takes no time at all. The idea though is that there's other ways of looking at it, and you want to basically park the biggest price at the biggest PPM predicted down, right? And that's why constructors were so massive before. You want to just take care of that. They passively, collect points from both drivers, and even the targets that Play On at the time introduced, it was like 1.55 versus 1.2 points per million. Well, why is that? Why can't you just even them out and have both of them be like that? Like, why can't Red Bull be, 40 million and Verstappen is 20 million? It would be all right. So I don't really see how to think differently about it. There is only so much you can do. You pick the best assets to park your money into, and you hope for those outcomes. Right now, I guess the thing to consider is that Red Bull is predicted to score the most points, but that's also assuming that DNF is 4%. That's like the base assumption that I just put in there. They've been reliable, like it's a continuation of last year, and like they were solid. But the moment that doesn't happen, like one of them DNFs, then you just fall on the bottom end, right? And you're not going to be around the average points. You're going to be in the gutter. Like a DNF is minus 20. So for a driver, and then it gets replicated within the constructor as well. So it's a tricky situation.
It's a big thing too because we're in an engine freeze until 2026, and the only modifications that could be done with the during the engine freeze are for safety or for reliability purposes, and so it's it's tough to bet on more mechanical failures as the seasons go on because some teams will be able to extract a little bit of performance trying to play with the technical regulations and try to do performance upgrades and blame it on safety or reliability. But a great example was Alpine at the start of the year. They had their water pump components. They were just kept having engine issues and all of these DNFs. They started becoming a lot more reliable towards the end of the season. And I think that that trend is only going to increase where reliability is going to play a bigger factor. So DNFs may naturally decrease just because the only likely cause of a DNF, or the common cause of a DNF, let's just say, will become predominantly an accident, right?
Mhm.
Or some sort of induced failure of some point. So those are some of the things that you also got to consider when it comes to DNFs, right? And Red Bull is the same, right? Like we're all like 3 races in. By the time that Australia was over, we were like, oh no, it's Ferrari's got this in the back. Sorry, I don't feel like I don't want to be speaking on an open wound as they were wearing the Ferrari,
Uh,
but
I got this. Yeah, I went to the race itself, and I got it there. I was like, well, I was like, $150. Do I buy it? And I was like, shit, that's expensive. But this could be the year. I want to have
yeah,
that 2022.
yeah.
Anyway, yeah, I was walking away with like, super big smile. But yeah, it didn't pan out. But
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and at the same time, like we heard things about rumors and things like that about Ferrari, like 30 horsepower, this and that. I'm not sure if that's happening, but they're definitely going to be trying to take the reliability aspect like as far as they can push it, like for the sake of just also increasing power, and then maybe they'll mess up and actually make it even less reliable. So I wouldn't be uh, surprised to see an engine failure or two once they calibrate their persistence.
Yeah. And Cybertron brings up a good point. I mean, if someone submitted the plans for upgrades ahead of the engine freeze, then technically it could still bring performance upgrades. I don't know how many folks are still waiting to bring that on, but it's a possibility. So yeah, it's a good highlight there, something that we want to keep in mind. But I want to switch gears a little bit.
Sure.
We're talking a lot about the past, and let's talk about the brand new. And one of the big things that is entirely new is chips. So this whole conversation of chips is something that's kind of interesting, and it's a new take on what effectively was the Mega Driver in the past in PlayOn's model, right? Where we had the Mega Driver and the Wild Card. Whereas right now, Formula One in this year, they're introducing these new chips, and we have 6 of them. There's the Autopilot, the Extra DRS, no negative chips, Wild Card, Limitless, and Final Fix. So my understanding is that you get to use each one once, and you can only use one per race. So, from my understanding, correct me if Andre or any of our watchers here that are watching this live, you don't get after the break, you don't get a reset of these chips. So effectively, these are the 6 that you have for the entire season. Um, and the 2 that we see again are the wild card, which was that we're all very familiar with. Anybody that's played fantasy through PlayOn's game in the past will know what this means. And then equally the extra DRS, which is the equivalent of the Mega Driver. So Turbo Driver becomes DRS Boost, which now that's one of the things that I'm not terribly happy about because now you can do it. There's no price cap on it, so everyone's just going to DRS Boost for stopping the whole way through. And then you have the extra DRS Boost, which is the 3x multiplier, which you'll probably want to pick something that is going to be relevant to Verstappen. But without streaks now, right? We're going to talk a little bit about the best, but without streaks, how let's start with the extra DRS boost. When do you use your extra DRS boost, Andre?
I guess during a sprint race, because you do get more points there. Like, so 8 per top finish, 7 for second, 6, 5, and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, you're right. Streaks were a big differentiator. I'm not sure how to think about it, because at the same time, it was such a good idea to follow through with it, right? You just steer towards that team, and at the end of the day, everybody was steering towards that team. And when you've got 4 drivers on streaks, well, you're going to aim to have all 4 of them and turbo drive one of them. So I'm not sure whether the disparity or the level of diversity of teams was great because of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point about having 2 wildcards and having 2 mega drivers, now we have, so that was 4 total. Now we have 6 different chips in there with slightly different flavors. Yep. Right. I don't think it would be like 1 before the summer break, or set of 6 before the summer break and set of 6 after, because that would be like 12 chips for 22 races. And that just seems extreme, like that you can do, something every other race. So I think it's going to be 6 things total. That makes most sense. Yeah. And for extra DRS, the thing that was important there is you wanted to have 2 drivers that were on, like, likely to score a lot of points. And so you'd pick Verstappen, Mega Drive, and then let's say Leclerc with a streak and potentially with a sprint for the turbo, and that would be huge, right? Now you're gonna probably have to settle for a little bit less with the extra DRS.
Yeah. But you talk about settling a little bit less, and Cybertron here makes a good point. So I'll jump to the next chip, which is the new chip, which is the Limitless. And that one looks like that's going to be a massive game changer if you play that right. Because now you have unlimited transfers, no cost cap. You could do Red Bull, Ferrari, Verstappen, Perez, Leclerc, Sainz, the Hamilton. Like, you could technically run that. And if you pull it on the right sprint weekend, which this time you have more options, because we have 6 sprint races, I think, this year.
Yeah.
This would be probably the biggest game changer, knowing which race to apply this to, and applying it correctly, right? Because some people might not understand that you have no budget, so maybe they'll play the Limitless and not pick as best as they could. But yeah, those are some of the things that you want to keep in mind there.
Yeah.
So any particular one of these, Andre, that gets you, any other chips here that get you particularly excited about the...
Excited?
Are you not a big fan of the chips this time around?
I feel like some of them are strong and uncalibrated, like Final Fix. Like, that just feels like, I don't know. I don't like get out jail free cards. It just feels like it'll have a very big impact for some and almost nothing for somebody else.
I feel like you've been traumatized as a kid playing Monopoly, and now you're just trying to get back at it.
I'd always win.
So, these are some of the big things that we have coming on. These chips are, for better or for worse, these are going to be the big differentiators for you and your teams, right, in terms of how you score points. So
I like the autopilot, because in a way, like, suppose you always do the DRS on Verstappen, but then you also have somebody from McLaren or Alfa Romeo, because you have to, because their price is low, and then they have like that mega race, and then they end up finishing first, just rain, I don't know, shit happens. That could be cool if all of a sudden Bottas, has 10 overtakes plus 10, position changes, 25 points, and then all of a sudden he gets doubled. I think it'd be good banter. Like I had him on my team and I played the autopilot, and got rewarded for it. So
Yeah, no, I think it's an interesting point. I mean, this year we're definitely going to have to change strategies a lot. In some ways, I'm I'm curious if the game is going to get little bit vanilla. I know that a lot of the penalties, for a lot of the negative points are kind of taken away in some ways. So um, I remember like wild swings and things like that. You could use your negative chip or whatever to save yourself from a bad from a bad weekend. Like I'm sitting there and I'm like, there were such dramatic moments in fantasy Formula One because someone DNFs and their mega driver. I'll have Monza 2021 again is a massive scar for me because like many people we had Hamilton, mega driver, and when Verstappen ended up on top of Hamilton, I was just like, it was what Hamilton scored 1 point, which Mega Driver was 3 points. It was just like insult to injury on that, on that Mega Driver. And it was just, I'm curious to see if we're gonna be able to have right like as exciting of a time. But this kind of leads into one of my big points here, right? Transfers. So one of the biggest challenges with transfers, or one of the things that you have to be very careful with, was when PlayOn was running the game, the penalty for going over your third swap was 10 points. And it was very hard. You had to be very, very confident that the person you're bringing in had to outscore someone by 10 points. And it's not like you're going to, oh, I'm going to get rid of Albon. So now I have an extra 15 million that I can put on signs instead. Right. So you'd have to pick someone within the realistic budget range of like, an extra million or two, depending on what your wallet looked like, to be able to say, oh, yeah, I'm confident enough that Hulk or Magnussen will outscore Albon by more than 10 points to justify making that switch, which made it almost it made it almost pointless. I could never advocate or I can't remember a time where I'm like, yeah, this makes good financial sense to risk for sure losing 10 points on a chance of scoring 12, 13, maybe getting a 2 to 3 point benefit on this. So those are some of the big things. But this time around, it's not 10 points, it's 4 points.
Yep.
So is there like I think we were talking about beforehand, you have some EPL, fantasy football experience. And I'm calling it football. I know I'm in the US. I'm still saying it football. The one that you actually use your feet to play with. But in fantasy football, you were saying that it's also 4 points typically.
Yeah, it's 4 points, and on average, you would score about between 60 and 90 points game week. So in a way, 4 out of 70, 4 out of 80 was kind of like a similar proportion than 10 out of 200 that we're expecting from a Formula One fantasy game. So 10 felt right. It was commensurate with other fantasy sports. Moving this down to 4 makes it very cheap. And if you have like 2 free transfers and you don't use one of them, you can roll over one and you can have up to 3. And then what? You do the 3 the next race, and then you can pay 8 points to basically change up all of your drivers. It seems like it's a good deal. Changing 5 drivers for 8 points because all of a sudden this weird track, let's say Mexico, has high altitude, favors Mercedes, and you just like bring in all Mercedes assets or something like that. I'm not a fan of the -4. It feels like makes it too cheap.
I mean, ultimately, you can look at it as a new strategy, right? Because we're looking for ways to strategize. And as you were talking about the oddball tracks, I'm thinking about Monaco. Monaco might be your final fix place because qualifying plays such a big role. So, if you find out the qualifying results and you can use your final fix, I think that's what the final fix is, right? The final fix is after the qualifier, or like there's somewhere that you can like make a change, I think,
Yeah,
uh,
and
post
it's
qualifying.
free.
Yeah, and it's free.
That's
So Monaco, knowing qualifying, right, is everything. Just put your bet on whatever Ferrari ended up in the front, and just hope the guys won't mess up the strategy that bad enough that they'll put your driver to like sixth or seventh place. But I mean, it's almost like the thinking out loud. It's kind of the way to do it, right? You play your transfers out,
there will
and
be some key races where it will have the most effect, right? Like something to do with the rain, something to do with Monaco, etc. You're gonna you stand the most to potentially gain there because the probability of something happening is much bigger.
yeah. So it's kind of funny. There's a little bit
Of a descent,
there,
yeah.
there's a
I
little
like
bit
it.
of this chatter going on. Some folks thinking that it's not enough, or it's a bad game decision. Some folks thinking that it's still potentially a lot. I mean, look, fellas, it's all good points. I mean, we're all here speculating right now because we haven't run the game to really see how this is going to end up. But I agree with Andrey. I think it does seem to be on the lenient side, but I try to look at it as here's a different
Yeah,
strategy or a different angle that you're going to have to play with, right? Because ultimately, we just want to score the most points, right? So it's just something else that we have there that we want to consider.
yeah. I guess it depends on what you're comparing to. So I guess in a way, saying that the point of 4 points still a lot, that's valid depending on what your reference point is. Is it the team that you're making points from, or is it the driver that you're making points from? And if you're using the -4 in a driver, and let's say you have Red Bull and Ferrari that just parking the most amount of money to get the most number of points, you might be dealing with making swaps between Zhao, De Vries, Tsunoda, and yeah, they're 4 points, and and they're projected to score 3 or 4. That's a big difference. So I guess, yeah, not every single -4 will be the same, and it will be very much context driven, as like what team are you going from and to, and again, one of the features that were built into F1 Fantasy tools was starting off with the team that you have currently, and then select the number of swaps that you have left, and then it will calculate and give you suggestions as to which teams are available from your starting point. So obviously, first race, it's a little bit irrelevant, but come second race, it'll become instrumental.
Yeah, definitely. So the final topic that I had here was mostly on just coming back here on back marker traffic, right? So we were talking about different strategies and old versus new strategies. So the biggest piece was, is this still something that that's relevant? And one of the things that I can't help but look at, but first setting the stage, for those that remember, you could have a couple of back marker trappers. Like I think we call them the survivability drivers, right? The guys that would start dead last, and like especially if like the team was really poor, like Williams was, and you had Russell. Russell was just such an amazing survivability driver during a couple of seasons because he would always beat his teammate, no matter who he was. Mr. Saturday and all the different names that he had. So he would get all of these beat teammate points. And he would get the overtake points because the people that would DNF ahead of him, and he would just be there and gain 5 places out of other people DNFing just on accidents, whatever the case. So he could have consistent weekends of scoring 10 points in fantasy and being this survivability driver that does really well. But with all of that going away, well, not the overtake, but the beat teammates in particular, I mean, I'm looking at the points per million, and Williams aside, everyone else just takes a massive hit, except for, again, questionably priced Alonso here. So how do
Yeah,
you
so
feel
things
about
might still change when it comes to free practice 1, 2, 3, right? Not everybody is going to be showing their race pace, and I think the problem with Haas and AlphaTauri in my simulation here is that their race pace is predicted to be very poor, and they could have been just doing a lot of lifting and coasting and doing all kinds of stuff, and then it didn't get picked up by whatever tools they were having to actually infer what the actual pace is, and they just missed that. And then I'm using data that's incomplete, and it will get better, and I'm sure that there won't be as many like reliably negative point drivers as what I'm indicating in the simulation right now, or at least I mean, it would be weird if the car was just a rocket during qualifying and then always falling back. Yeah, but some of the other things that I think we kind of touched on, but didn't. So pit stops will become important because now constructors get points for fastest pit stops. Driver of the day gets 10 points, and all those things will kind of be up in the air. We can definitely play the.
It's a shame that Kimi isn't racing anymore, because otherwise we would just pick Kimi for driver of the day points.
Yeah, and I think Vettel also did pretty well last year as well.
Yeah.
But I think people gravitate towards somebody high up the field, somebody who is setting fast laps, and somebody who's doing or making overtakes, right? And you need a sluggish qualifying car and hopefully faster race car, and whichever one that's going to be like, right? So if you have 10 cars, one of them 10 is going to be the best at that. So whoever that is, you should probably consider having an asset or two from that. And the other thing about overtakes is that that's actually a way to potentially make very, very many points, because the way that they phrased it is that it's both the where you start and where you finish, the delta being like the number of points. And then if you've overtaken people on the track, then that's those number of overtakes as well, if they're legitimate, like, fighting for position. So if you overtake someone, then they overtake you back, overtake. There's no negatives on those. It's just always accumulating. So it will be interesting if there's 10 swaps between Tsunoda and De Vries, and all of a sudden AlphaTauri is smashing it.
We'll see. All right. I mean, I think that's probably a good place to wrap up. Those are some really good strategies that you're kind of highlighting. Again, things to keep in mind with the pit stops. Some things are easier to predict than others. But we'll see how this plays together. Any final thoughts, Andrey, before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I think last time I had one of these at the beginning of the year, I was thinking flexibility was going to be key, because you want to be able to react. Here, I'd like to say the same thing, but it feels like for now, Red Bull Ferrari or Red Bull Aston Martin they're just too good to pass up. Verstappen, you have no choice but to get him. He just looked so good.
And now he's eligible for the DRS boost, which is a whole separate thing.
So that's like what, 70 points from Red Bull, 50 from Ferrari, and then 35 times 2. It's like, that's massive points, right? And then you just like gotta pick up your, Alonso and somebody else, right? And
that's pretty much
it feels like, the beginning of this game, it feels wanting, but hopefully as prices change and more assets become interesting in terms of their value proposition, we'll have a better game on our hands. But I think the three teams that I'll have, one of them will be Red Bull Ferrari, one of them will be Red Bull Aston Martin, and I'll try to make something funky. I don't know. Yeah, Red Bull. No, not Red Bull. Mercedes, McLaren or something like that, just for the hell of it. Maybe McLaren is sandbagging like usual.
We'll see. It's a brand new year. It's a brand new platform. Let's take a look and see how Formula One uses the tools at their disposal to make improvements as well. I mean, they could easily balance things out with prices, right? and improve from there. So it'll be curious, but we're going to give it a shot, see how this plays out. Or otherwise, you'll see us at the next one talking about, what strategies we have for play-ons, Motorsport Gaming Hub. But at least for now, we'll give the official Formula One fantasy a chance. And well, again, for everyone that's watching, I know you guys, we did this very last minute. I think we published this 30 minutes before we went live. But if you guys are enjoying this, if you guys want to see more of these, again, we do this on demand. For us, this is about, the boys just having fun and talking Formula One for a second. So it's your support that drives us putting these together. So go to, f1fantasytools.com. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want, what topics you want covered. And, Andrey and I will get together and get these going. So for my end, Andrey, appreciate everyone, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Good luck this year with Fantasy Formula One.
Yeah, thanks for setting us up.
Yeah. See you, everyone.